Chapter 9, Giovanni's Ticket. This is the end of the Swan District. Look over there. That's the famous observatory of Albireo. Outside the window, in the middle of the Milky Way, where it looked as if fireworks were bursting, 4 large black buildings stood tall. On the flat roof of one of them, 2 large transparent spheres, one blue sapphire and the other yellow topaz, spun gently in a circle. The yellow one gradually moved away, while the small blue one came closer, and soon their edges overlapped, forming a beautiful green double convex lens shape. The center began to swell, and eventually, the blue sphere came fully in front of the topaz, creating a bright yellow ring around the green center. That also gradually shifted sideways, reversing the shape of the front lens, and finally separated, with the sapphire moving away while the yellow sphere advanced, returning to the previous arrangement. Surrounded by the formless and soundless waters of the galaxy, the black observatory lay quietly as if in slumber. That device measures the speed of the water. The water. The bird catcher began to explain, but at that moment, "I need to see your tickets," said a tall conductor in a red hat, standing straight beside their seats. The bird catcher silently took out a small piece of paper from his pocket. The conductor glanced at it, then quickly averted his eyes, gesturing with his finger as if to say, "What about yours?" "Well," Giovanni fidgeted, feeling uneasy. Meanwhile, Campanella, seemingly unconcerned, produced a small mouse-colored ticket. Giovanni, completely flustered, wondered if he had perhaps left his ticket in the pocket of his jacket. When he reached in, he felt something large and folded. Curious about what it could be, he hastily pulled it out, only to find it was a green piece of paper folded into quarters, about the size of a postcard. Since the conductor was reaching out his hand, Giovanni thought, whatever it is, just give it, and handed it over. The conductor stood upright again and carefully opened it to examine it. As he read, he kept adjusting the buttons on his jacket, and the lighthouse keeper below was peering up at it intently. Giovanni felt a slight warmth in his chest, thinking that it must be some kind of certificate or something similar. "Did you bring this from the third-dimensional space?" the conductor asked. "I don't really know," Giovanni replied, feeling reassured that everything was all right, and chuckled as he looked up at him. "Very well. We will arrive at the Southern Cross around 3 o'clock, the conductor said, handing the paper back to Giovanni and moving on. Campanella eagerly leaned in to see what the paper was, as if he couldn't wait. Giovanni was equally curious to see it. However, it was covered with a pattern resembling black arabesques, featuring about 10 strange printed characters. As he stared quietly, he felt as if he might be sucked into it. Then, the bird catcher glanced at it from the side and said, seemingly flustered, "What is that?" "Oh, this is quite something. This ticket can even take you to the real heavens. It's not just to the heavens, it's a pass that allows you to go anywhere you like. If you have this, indeed, you should be able to go anywhere on this imperfect fantasy of the 4th dimension Galactic Railroad, and you folks are something else." "I don't really understand," Giovanni replied, turning red as he tucked the ticket away again. Feeling a bit embarrassed, he and Campanella gazed out the window, but he could vaguely sense that the bird catcher was occasionally glancing at them with admiration. "We'll be arriving at the Eagle station soon," Campanella said, comparing 3 small blue triangular markers on the opposite shore with a map. For some reason, Giovanni suddenly felt an overwhelming pity for the bird catcher beside him. He thought about how joyful it would be to catch a heron, how he would be pleased, wrapping it in white cloth, and how surprised he would be to see someone admiring his ticket, which made him anxious to please. As he contemplated these things, he felt a strong desire to give away everything he had, all the food and possessions, to ensure that this man would truly be happy. He felt as if he would stand for 100 years by the shimmering riverbank of the Milky Way to catch birds for him, and he could no longer remain silent. He wanted to ask him, "What is it that you truly want?" But that seemed too abrupt, so he thought about how to approach him and looked back, only to find that the birdcatcher was no longer there. There were no white packages visible on the luggage rack either. He quickly looked outside, wondering if the man was looking up at the sky, preparing to catch a heron, but all he saw was a beautiful expanse of sand and waves of white pampas grass. He could not see the birdcatcher's broad back or pointed hat. "Where did that person go?" Campanella said, looking absent-mindedly. "Where could he have gone? When will we meet again?" I really wanted to say something to him, Giovanni pondered. I feel the same way. I felt like he was in the way. That's why I feel so troubled. Giovanni realized that this peculiar feeling was something he had never experienced before, and he thought he had never spoken such words until now. "I smell apples. I wonder if it's because I was just thinking about apples," Campanella said, looking around in wonder. "It really does smell like apples. And it also smells like wild roses." Giovanni looked around as well, but it seemed that the scent was coming through the window. He thought it was odd, since it was autumn and wild rose flowers shouldn't be blooming now. Suddenly, there stood a boy of about 6 with shiny black hair, barefoot and trembling with a terribly surprised look on his face, his red jacket unbuttoned. Next to him was a tall young man in neatly fitted black clothing, standing with a posture like a beech tree, firmly holding the boy's hand. "Oh, where is this place?" "My, it's beautiful," said the girl, who was about 12 years old, with brown eyes and a cute appearance. She wore a black cloak and clung to the young man's arm, looking out the window with a curious expression. "Oh, this is Lancashire." "No, it's Connecticut." "No, we have come to the sky. We are going to heaven. Look. That sign is a sign of the heavens. There is nothing to be afraid of anymore. We are being summoned by God," said the young man in black clothes, joyfully addressing the girl. However, for some reason, he also furrowed his brow deeply, appearing very tired, and forced a smile as he sat the boy next to Giovanni. Then he gently pointed to the seat next to Campanella for the girl. She obediently sat down there, neatly clasping her hands. "I'm going to see my big sister," said the boy, just after sitting down, making a strange face as he looked at the young man sitting across from the lighthouse keeper. The young man looked sadly at the boy's wet, curly head without saying anything. Suddenly, the girl covered her face with both hands and began to cry softly. Father and big sister still have various jobs to do. But they will come soon after. More than that, how long has mother been waiting? I wonder what my dear Tadashi is singing now, whether he's playing with everyone in the snowy morning, holding hands and running around the thicket. She is truly waiting and worrying, so let's go see mother quickly." "Yeah, but I wish I hadn't gotten on the boat." "Yes, but look, see how magnificent that river is. That's the place that always looked faintly white from the window while singing 'Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star' during the summer. That's it. Isn't it beautiful? It's sparkling so much." The sister, who had been crying, wiped her eyes with a handkerchief and looked outside. The young man gently told the siblings again as if to teach them. "We have nothing to be sad about anymore. We are traveling through such a wonderful place, and we will soon be going to God. There, it is truly bright, fragrant, and filled with splendid people. And those who can board the boat in our place will surely be saved and sent to their worried parents and homes. So, let's cheer up and sing happily, as we are almost there. The young man caressed the boy's wet black hair, comforting everyone, and gradually his own face began to brighten. Where did you come from? What happened to you? The lighthouse keeper asked the young man, seeming to understand a little better now. The young man smiled faintly. No, we hit an iceberg and the ship sank. Our father here had urgent business and returned to our homeland 2 months ago, so we left afterward. I was attending university and working as a tutor. However, on the 12th day, around today or yesterday, the ship collided with an iceberg and began to tip over and sink. There was a faint moonlight somewhere, but the fog was extremely thick. The lifeboat was already half ruined on the port side, so it was impossible for everyone to fit in. The ship was sinking rapidly, and I desperately shouted to let the small children aboard. The nearby people immediately opened the way and prayed for the children. However, there were still many small children and parents in the way, and no one had the courage to push them aside. Even so, I thought it was my duty to help these people, so I tried to push the children in front of me aside. Yet, I also thought that instead of rescuing them like that, it would truly be their happiness to go together before God. So, I resolved to bear the sin of going against God alone and decided to help them. However, I found it impossible to just watch. When I let the children go into the lifeboat, and their mother, as if mad, sent kisses, while their father stood still, suppressing his sorrow, it felt like my insides were being torn apart. Meanwhile, the ship continued to sink, so we huddled together, fully prepared, holding on to these 2 people, and waited for the ship to sink. A life buoy flew by, thrown by someone, but it slipped away far off. I clung tightly to the lattice of the deck as we were thrown overboard. Voices of 306 rang out from somewhere. Suddenly, everyone began to sing it all at once in various languages. At that moment, there was a loud sound, and we fell into the water, thinking we had already entered a whirlpool, but I held on to these people tightly, and then, as if in a daze, we found ourselves here. Their mother passed away the year before last. Yes, the lifeboat must have surely been saved, as very experienced sailors rowed quickly away from the ship. From around there, small sighs and voices of prayer could be heard, and Giovanni and Campanella recalled the various things they had forgotten until now, feeling their eyes grow warm. Ah, that vast ocean must have been called the Pacific. In the sea flowing to the northern edge with those icebergs, someone is working desperately aboard a small ship, battling against the wind, the freezing seawater, and the intense cold. I truly feel sorry for that person and feel like I owe them something. What can I do for their happiness? Giovanni hung his head and sank into deep gloom. I don't know what happiness is. Really, no matter how painful it is, if it happens while moving along the right path, then each step up and down the path brings you closer to true happiness. The lighthouse keeper offered comfort. Ah, that's right. It's all for the sake of reaching the greatest happiness, so all the various sorrows are bestowed upon us. The young man answered as if praying. The brother and sister were already exhausted, each leaning back in their seats, fast asleep. The bare feet that had been exposed earlier were now wearing soft, white shoes. The train chugged along the dazzling banks of the phosphorescent river. Looking out the window on the other side, the fields appeared like a magic lantern show. There were hundreds, thousands of various-sized triangular markers, with surveying flags marked by red dots atop the larger ones. The edge of the fields seemed to gather those markers into a hazy, bluish mist, from which, or perhaps from even further beyond, various shapes resembling faint signal fires were intermittently launched into the beautiful sky of bellflower blue. Indeed, that translucent, lovely breeze was filled with the scent of roses. How do you like it? "This kind of apple must be your first," said the lighthouse keeper sitting across the aisle, holding a large apple beautifully adorned in gold and crimson on his lap, careful not to drop it. "Oh, where did you come from? It's magnificent. Are such apples grown around here?" The young man seemed genuinely surprised, gazing intently at the collection of apples in the lighthouse keeper's hands, squinting his eyes and tilting his head. "Well, please, take one. Do take one," the keeper urged. The young man took one and glanced over at Giovanni and his friends. "Come now, you boys over there. How about it? Please take one." Giovanni was slightly offended to be called boy and remained silent, but Campanella said, "Thank you." Then the young man took one for himself and passed one to each of them, prompting Giovanni to stand and say thank you. The lighthouse keeper finally had both arms free and gently placed an apple on the knees of the sleeping siblings. "Thank you very much. Where can such splendid apples be grown?" the young man asked, looking deeply. "Well, of course, farming is done around here, but usually, good crops seem to grow on their own. Farming isn't too labor-intensive either. Generally, as long as you plant the seeds you desire, they grow abundantly on their own. Even rice doesn't come with husks like it does in the Pacific, and it's 10 times larger and more fragrant. However, in your part of the world, there's no farming at all. Apples, too, as well as confections, have no resemblance at all. Each has its own distinct, slightly pleasant aroma that scatters from individual to individual," he replied. Suddenly, the boy opened his eyes wide and said something. "Oh, I was just dreaming about my mother. She was in a splendid cupboard with books, looking at me and reaching out with a smile. I said, 'Shall I go pick some apples for you?' And then I woke up. Ah, I'm here in the train we were on earlier. The apples are right there. I received them from this gentleman," the young man said. "Thank you, sir. Oh, look, big sister is still sleeping. I'll wake her up. Sister. Look, I got some apples. Wake up." The sister smiled, opened her eyes, squinted against the light, and then looked at the apple. The boy was already eating it, as if it were a pie. The beautiful skin that he had peeled off fell to the floor in a swirling, corkscrew shape, disappearing as it turned to ash and evaporated. The two carefully put the apples in their pockets. On the opposite bank of the river, they saw a large, lush green forest, its branches heavy with ripe, shiny red fruit. In the center of that forest stood a tall triangular marker, and from within the woods, a beautiful sound flowed, blending with the notes of the orchestra and the xylophone, drifting gently in the wind. The young man shivered and shook his body. As he silently listened to the music, the surrounding fields seemed to spread out in bright yellow and pale green, and white, waxy dew seemed to skim across the surface of the sun. "Wow, look at that crow," exclaimed the girl named Kaoru, who sat next to Campanella. "That's not a crow, they're all magpies," Campanella casually corrected, causing Giovanni to laugh unintentionally, while the girl felt a bit embarrassed. Indeed, on the pale blue light of the riverbank, many black birds were lined up, quietly receiving the river's soft glow. "They're magpies, aren't they? Look, the feathers on the back of their heads are sticking up," the young man added as if meditating. The triangular marker in the blue forest came right in front of the train. At that moment, from far behind, they heard the familiar melody of hymn 306. It sounded like a large group was singing together. The young man's face suddenly turned pale, and he seemed ready to stand and go over there but thought better of it and sat back down. The girl, Kaoru, pressed a handkerchief to her face. Giovanni felt his nose getting strange too, but before long, the song began to be sung by someone, gradually becoming clearer and stronger. Giovanni and Campanella found themselves singing along without even realizing it. And as the blue olive forest shimmered brightly beyond the invisible Milky Way, the strange sounds of the flowing music faded into the sounds of the train and the wind. "Oh, look, there's a peacock. Oh, look, there's a peacock. That must be the forest where the lyre of the forest spirits is," said the girl. "I'm sure that the great orchestra from long ago is gathered in that forest, and there are many blue peacocks and such around." "Yes, there were a lot," the girl replied. Giovanni saw the blue-white reflections of the peacock's feathers, which flared and folded, shining above the small forest that now looked like a tiny green shell. "Yes, I heard the peacocks call just a while ago," Campanella said to the girl. "Yes, there were certainly about 30 of them," the girl answered. Suddenly, Giovanni felt an indescribable sadness and almost said with a scared face, "Campanella, let's get down from here and go play." But at that moment, Giovanni saw something mysterious far downriver. It was certainly something black, smooth, and elongated, which seemed to jump out over the invisible Milky Way water and then disappear back into the water in a bow-like shape. He thought it was strange and watched closely, and soon he noticed that something similar had happened much closer to them. Then, all around, those strange black, smooth things were leaping out of the water, soaring in circles, and diving back in headfirst, resembling fish swimming upstream. "Well, what is that? Look, there are so many. What could that be?" The boy, who had been rubbing his sleepy eyes, stood up in surprise. "What is it?" The young man also stood up. "What a strange fish, what could that be?" "It's dolphins," Campanella answered while looking in that direction. "I've never seen dolphins before. But this isn't the sea, is it?" "Dolphins don't always live in the sea," that mysterious low voice said again from somewhere. Truly, the way those dolphins appeared was odd, as they jumped out of the water with their two fins held down like arms in a fixed position, bowing their heads respectfully before diving back into the water in the same posture. The invisible Milky Way water also shimmered at that moment like blue flames. "Are dolphins fish?" the girl asked Campanella. The boy seemed exhausted and was slumped in his seat, asleep. "Dolphins aren't fish. They're creatures like whales," Campanella replied. "Have you ever seen a whale?" "I have seen a whale. I could only see its head and black tail. When it blows out water, it looks just like it does in books." "A whale is really big," the girl replied. "Yes, whales are big. Even their young are about the size of a dolphin," he said. "That's right, I saw it in Arabian Nights," the sister said, fiddling with her thin silver ring and speaking with interest. "Campanella, I'm going to leave now. I've never even seen a whale." Giovanni felt an unbearable urge to speak and was on the verge of saying, "Campanella, let's get off and play," but he bit his lip tightly and turned to look out the window. Outside that window, the shape of the dolphins was no longer visible, and the river split into two. In the middle of a dark island, a tall tower was built, and a man wearing loose clothing and a red hat stood on top. He was signaling with red and blue flags, looking up at the sky. As Giovanni watched, the man waved the red flag repeatedly, then suddenly lowered it and hid it behind him, raising the blue flag high, waving it vigorously like an orchestra conductor. Then, there was a sound in the air like rain, and something dark, in clusters, flew like cannonballs across the river. Giovanni couldn't help but lean halfway out of the window to look up. Under the beautifully clear sky, thousands of little birds flew by, each one chirping busily. "The birds are flying away," Giovanni said from the window. "Look." Campanella also looked at the sky. At that moment, the man in the loose clothes on the tower suddenly raised the red flag and waved it frantically, and the flock of birds stopped passing. At the same time, a loud popping sound echoed from downriver, followed by a brief silence. Then, the signalman with the red hat waved the blue flag again and shouted, "Now, migratory birds, now is your time to cross." Giovanni heard his voice clearly. With that, tens of thousands of birds flew straight through the sky. The girl, peering out of the middle window where the two boys were, looked up at the sky with her beautiful cheeks glowing. "Oh, look at all those birds. My, how beautiful the sky is." She spoke to Giovanni, but he thought it was rude and replied silently, keeping his mouth shut while looking up at the sky. The girl let out a small sigh of relief and quietly returned to her seat. Campanella, looking sympathetic, pulled his face back from the window and began to study the map. "Is that person signaling to the birds?" the girl quietly asked Campanella. "He's signaling to the migratory birds." "Surely, a signal is going up from somewhere," Campanella replied somewhat uncertainly. The carriage fell silent. Giovanni wanted to withdraw his head, but it was hard for him to show his face in the bright light, so he stood still, quietly whistling. "Why am I feeling so sad? I need to have a more beautiful and open heart. Over there, on the far bank, I can see a small blue flame that looks just like smoke. It truly feels calm and cold. I must look at that closely to calm my heart." Giovanni pressed his throbbing head with both hands and looked that way. "Oh, really, isn't there anyone who will go with me anywhere? Even Campanella seems to be having an interesting conversation with that girl, while I'm truly suffering." Giovanni's eyes filled with tears again, and the Milky Way appeared to look blurred and distant, appearing as if it had gone far away. At that moment, the train gradually moved away from the river and started to run along the cliffs. The opposite bank also had a dark cliff that rose higher as it went downstream. Giovanni caught a glimpse of a large cornstalk. The leaves were twisted, and beneath them were beautiful green husks, with red hairs poking out, and the occasional glimpse of pearl-like kernels. The number of these increased, and now they lined up like a row between the cliff and the tracks. When Giovanni unintentionally pulled his face back from the window and looked at the window on the opposite side, he saw the horizon of the beautiful sky fields filled almost entirely with those large corn stalks, swaying in the wind. Their splendid twisted leaves were glistening with dew, as if they had absorbed all the sunlight during the day, shining bright red, green, and sparkling. "That's corn, isn't it?" Campanella said to Giovanni, but Giovanni couldn't shake off his gloomy feelings and just bluntly looked at the fields, replying, "I guess so." At that moment, the train grew quieter, passing several signals and lights from the switchboard, and came to a stop at a small station. The pale blue clock in front indicated exactly 2 o'clock. With no wind, the train stood still, and in the quiet field, the pendulum ticked steadily, marking the time accurately. And indeed, amidst the sound of the pendulum, a faint, faint melody flowed like a thread from the far, far end of the fields. "Symphony of the New World," said the girl in the seat across, as if to herself, looking this way. In the carriage, the tall young man in black and everyone else were all dreaming gentle dreams. "Why can't I feel more joyful in such a peaceful place? Why do I feel so lonely? But Campanella is really terrible. While riding the train with me, he seems to be talking only with that girl. I truly feel miserable." Giovanni again half covered his face with his hand and stared out the window. The train started moving quietly with the sound of a clear flute, and Campanella, looking lonely, whistled the tune of the stars. "Yes, yes, this area is a terrible plateau." From behind, the voice of an older man, as if he had just awakened, was heard talking clearly. "You can't grow corn if you don't make a 2-foot hole with a pole and sow it there." "Is that so? How far is it to the river, I wonder?" Yes, the river is from 2,000 to 6,000 feet away." It's really become quite a canyon. Giovanni thought, isn't this the Colorado Plateau? Without meaning to. The sister was letting her younger brother lean against her chest as he slept, gazing into the distance with her black eyes, lost in thought. Campanella continued to whistle sadly to himself, while the boy looked at Giovanni with a face as smooth and red as an apple wrapped in silk. Suddenly, the corn disappeared, and a vast black field opened up. The symphony of the New World became clearer, rising from the horizon, and in that dark field, an Indian appeared, wearing white feathers on his head, adorning his arms and chest with many stones, and knocking an arrow to his little bow, running after the train. "Oh, look, it's an Indian. An Indian. Sister, look." The young man in black also awoke. Giovanni and Campanella both stood up. "Look, it's running. Oh, it's running. It must be chasing something," said Giovanni. "No, it's not chasing the train. It's probably hunting or dancing," the young man replied, standing with his hands in his pockets, as if forgetting where he was. Indeed, the Indian seemed to be dancing half the time. Even when he took off, his footwork appeared to be more economical and serious. Suddenly, the bright white feathers tilted forward, and the Indian came to a sudden stop, swiftly drawing his bow towards the sky. From there, a crane fell to the ground, landing right in the outstretched arms of the Indian, who stood there smiling happily. As the Indian looked back at them, his shadow grew smaller and smaller, and the insulators on the telegraph poles glimmered and sparkled, before turning back into a cornfield. Looking out of the window on this side, Giovanni saw that the train was truly running high above a steep cliff, and below in the valley, the river flowed wide and bright. "Yes, we're going down from here. It won't be easy to reach the water's surface all at once. Since there's a slope, the train definitely won't come back this way. See, it's getting faster," the voice of the previous old man said. Down, down, down the train went. As the railway crossed the edge of the cliff, the river sparkled brightly below. Giovanni's spirits began to lift. When the train passed by a small cabin and saw a lone child standing there looking at them, he couldn't help but exclaim, "Wow!" Down, down, down the train went. The passengers in the car leaned back, clinging tightly to their seats. Giovanni involuntarily laughed with Campanella. Meanwhile, the Milky Way seemed to flow vigorously right beside the train, shimmering occasionally as it flowed. Pink carnation flowers bloomed here and there along the riverbank. The train finally seemed to have settled down and was moving slowly. Flags depicting stars and pickaxes fluttered on both sides of the river. "I wonder what those flags are," Giovanni finally spoke up. "Well, I don't know. They aren't even on the map. There's a steel ship anchored there," Campanella said. "Oh," Giovanni replied. "Maybe it's a place for building a bridge," the girl suggested. "Ah, that's an engineer's flag. They must be conducting bridge-building exercises. But I can't see any soldiers," Campanella said. At that moment, a little downstream on the opposite bank, the unseen waters of the Milky Way gleamed brightly, shooting up high like a pillar, followed by a loud crash. "It's a blast! It's a blast!" Campanella exclaimed, dancing around. The water, which had become like a pillar, vanished from sight, and large salmon and trout sparkled brightly, their bellies shining as they were thrown into the air, tracing round arcs before falling back into the water. Giovanni felt so light-hearted that he wanted to leap with joy and said, "It's the sky's engineering battalion. Look at how the trout jumped up like that. I've never had such a delightful journey. Isn't it great? If those are trout, they must be this big when seen up close. There are so many fish in this water, said the girl, getting caught up in the conversation. There must be little fish too, she added. There must be. If there are big ones, there are probably small ones too. But we can't see them from far away, Giovanni replied, his spirits fully lifted as he laughed and spoke to the girl. Those must be the shrine of the twin stars, the boy suddenly shouted, pointing out of the window. On the low hill to the right stood two small shrines that looked as if they were made of crystal. What is the shrine of the twin stars? I've heard it from my mother many times before. They must be those small crystal shrines standing side by side, she replied. Tell me about it. What did the twin stars do? I know too. The twin stars went out to play in the field and got into a fight with a crow, said the boy. That's not right. You see, on the bank of the Milky Way, my mother told me. And then the comet came saying Ji, Fuji, Jifu, right? No, that's not it, Ta-chan. That's another story. Then are they playing the flute over there now? They've gone to the sea. You shouldn't say that. They've already come up from the sea. Yes, yes. I know. I'll tell the story. The opposite bank of the river suddenly turned red. The willows and other trees were outlined in deep black, and the invisible waves of the Milky Way occasionally shimmered red like needles. In fact, a large, bright red fire was blazing in the meadow on the opposite bank, and the black smoke seemed to scorch the cold, bellflower-colored sky high above. The fire burned more brilliantly than rubies, more beautifully than lithium, creating a kind of intoxication as it blazed. What kind of fire is that? What could be burning to make such a red flame? Giovanni said. That's the fire of the scorpion, Campanella replied, again nodding toward the map. Oh, I know about the fire of the scorpion, the girl said. What is the fire of the scorpion? Giovanni asked. The scorpion burned and died. That fire is still burning now, and I've heard about it from my father many times, she replied. A scorpion is an insect, right? Yes, a scorpion is an insect. But it's a good insect, she said. A scorpion isn't a good insect. I saw one preserved in alcohol at the museum. It has this kind of stinger on its tail, and if you get stung, you die, the teacher said. That's true. But it's still a good insect. My father said that once, in the meadows of Baldra, there was a scorpion that killed and ate small insects to survive. Then one day, it was discovered by weasels and almost eaten. The scorpion ran for its life, but eventually, it was about to be caught by the weasels. Just then, it suddenly found a well in front of it and fell into it. It couldn't get out and began to drown. At that moment, the scorpion prayed, saying, I don't know how many lives I have taken until now, and yet when I was about to be caught by the weasels, I ran for my life with all my might. Still, I ended up like this. Oh, nothing is reliable. Why didn't I just give my body to the weasels quietly? Then the weasels could have lived for another day. Oh, God, please see my heart. I won't waste my life so emptily. Please use my body for the true happiness of everyone next time. That's what it is said to have prayed. Then, it is said that one day the scorpion saw its own body burning beautifully as a bright red fire, illuminating the darkness of the night. My father said that it is still burning. That fire is indeed it. That's right. Look. Those triangular markers over there are arranged just like a scorpion. Giovanni saw that behind the large fire, there were 3 triangular markers arranged like the arms of a scorpion, and 5 markers on this side, arranged like a scorpion's tail. Indeed, that beautiful, bright red scorpion fire burned brightly and silently. As the fire gradually moved to the background, everyone heard an indescribably lively sound, like various musical notes and the scent of flowers and grasses, along with whistling and the chatter of people. It felt as if there was soon a town nearby where a festival was taking place. "Let it rain, Centaur," suddenly shouted the boy next to Giovanni, who had been sleeping until now, as he looked out the window. Ah, there stood a blue tree, a cryptomeria like a Christmas tree, adorned with many little electric lights that looked like thousands of fireflies had gathered. "Oh, that's right. Tonight is the Centaur Festival." "Ah, this is Centaur Village," Campanella immediately replied. "If it's a ball toss, I'm sure I won't miss," the boy boasted proudly. "We'll soon reach 1000 Cross. Please prepare to get off," the young man said to everyone. "I want to ride the train a bit longer," the boy said. The girl next to Campanella began to fidget and prepare to get off, but she still seemed reluctant to part from Giovanni and the others. "You must get off here," the young man said firmly, looking down at the boy. "No way. I'm going to stay on the train a bit longer," Giovanni said, unable to hold back. "Let's ride together. We have tickets that can take us anywhere," he added. "But we have to get off here. This is where we go up to heaven," the girl said sadly. "Who says we have to go to heaven? My teacher said we should create a place here that's even better than heaven," Giovanni insisted. "But my mother is going, and God says so," the girl replied. "That God is a false God," Giovanni retorted. "Your God is a false God." "That's not true. What kind of God is your God?" the young man asked with a smile. "I don't really know. But it's not that, it's the one true God." "Of course, the true God is one and only." "Oh, not just that, but the one true, genuine God." "Isn't that so? I pray that you will soon meet that true God before us," the young man said, modestly clasping his hands together. The girl did exactly the same. Everyone really seemed reluctant to part, and their faces looked a bit pale. Giovanni nearly burst into tears. "Are you ready to get off? We're almost at 1000 Cross." Ah, it was then. Downstream in the invisible Milky Way, a cross shimmered, sprinkled with blue, orange, and every kind of light, standing out like a tree rising from the river, with pale blue clouds forming a circular halo above it, like an aura. The train's interior became quite agitated. Everyone stood straight, just like during the time of the Northern Cross, and began to pray. Voices of joy rang out like children leaping at melons, and there were also indescribable, deep, humble sighs. Gradually, the cross came into view directly in front of the window, and the pale blue clouds, resembling apple flesh, were seen slowly, gently circling around it. "Hallelujah, hallelujah," everyone's bright and cheerful voices echoed, and they heard from afar, from the cold sky, a refreshing trumpet sound that was indescribably clear. The train gradually slowed down among the many signals and lights, and finally came to a complete stop right in front of the cross. "All right, it's time to get off," the young man said, pulling the boy's hand while the girl helped each other adjust their collars and shoulders as they began to walk toward the exit. "Well, goodbye," the girl turned back and said to the two of them. "Goodbye," Giovanni said brusquely, holding back tears as if he wanted to cry. The girl opened her eyes wide, looking truly distressed, glanced back one more time, and then silently walked out. The train car was now more than half empty, suddenly becoming desolate and lonely as the wind blew in abundantly. As they looked on, everyone had lined up modestly and was kneeling on the riverbank of the Milky Way before the cross. They saw a magnificent white figure extending a hand toward them, crossing the invisible waters of the Milky Way. But by that time, the glass bell was rung, and the train started moving. Before they knew it, a silver mist flowed in from downriver, obscuring everything. Only a number of walnut trees stood shining brightly in the mist, with adorable electric squirrels peeking out from within, their faces illuminated by a golden light. At that moment, the mist began to clear. There was a street with a row of small lamps, reminiscent of a town road leading somewhere. It ran alongside the tracks for a while, and as the two passed before the light, the tiny bean-colored flame flickered out, as if to greet them, and then reignited after they had gone by. When they turned to look back, the earlier cross had shrunk considerably, feeling as if it would hang on their hearts. They couldn't tell whether the girl and the young men were still kneeling on the white shore before it or if they had already gone to some unknown heavenly direction. Giovanni sighed deeply. "Campanella, now it's just the two of us again. Let's go together, wherever that may be. I don't mind burning my body 100 times for everyone's happiness, just like the scorpion." "Yeah, I feel the same way," said Campanella, tears sparkling in his eyes. "But what is true happiness, anyway?" Giovanni said. "I don't understand," Campanella said vaguely. "Let's hold on tight," Giovanni said, as if new strength was welling up in his heart, breathing out heavily. "Oh, over there is the coal sack. That's a hole in the sky." Campanella pointed to a spot in the Milky Way, as if trying to avoid looking directly at it. Giovanni looked over there and was startled. A large, dark hole in the Milky Way was gaping open. No matter how much he rubbed his eyes to peek inside, he could see nothing but darkness, and his eyes only throbbed with pain. Giovanni said, "I'm not afraid of such a big darkness anymore. I'm definitely going to search for everyone's true happiness. Let's move forward together, no matter how far." "Oh, we'll surely go. Ah, that field over there is so beautiful. Everyone is gathering there. That's the true heaven. Oh, look. My mother is over there." Campanella suddenly pointed and shouted at the beautiful field visible far out the window. Giovanni also looked over, but all he could see was a vague, white haze. It didn't seem like what Campanella had described. He felt an indescribable loneliness, gazing blankly in that direction, when he saw two telegraph poles on the opposite bank, standing side by side as if they were embracing each other with red arms. "Campanella, let's go together," Giovanni said, and when he turned to look back, there was no trace of Campanella in the seat where he had been sitting, only the dark velvet remained shining. Giovanni stood up as if he were a cannonball. Then, leaning out of the window so that no one could hear him, he struck his chest with all his strength and shouted, and then he began to cry deeply. It felt as if everything around him had suddenly turned dark. At that moment, "What are you crying about? Just look over here," the gentle voice, like that of a cello, which Giovanni had heard repeatedly, came from behind him. Giovanni suddenly realized and wiped away his tears, turning to look in that direction. In the seat where Campanella had been sitting just moments ago, there was a pale-faced adult wearing a large black hat, smiling gently and holding a thick book. "Your friend has gone somewhere," the adult said. "He has truly gone far away tonight. It is useless for you to search for Campanella now." "Ah, why is that?" "I said I would go straight with Campanella," Giovanni replied. "Ah, that's right. Everyone thinks that way. But you cannot go together. And everyone is Campanella. No matter who you meet, everyone has shared an apple with you or ridden on a train with you many times. So, you should indeed seek the greatest happiness of all, just as you thought before, and quickly go there with everyone. There, you will be able to truly go on together with Campanella forever." "Ah, I'll surely do that. But how should I seek it?" Giovanni asked. "Ah, to seek that. You must hold tightly to your ticket. And you must study diligently. You have learned chemistry, and you know that water is made up of oxygen and hydrogen. No one doubts that now. When you experiment, it truly proves to be so. But in ancient times, they said it was made of mercury and salt, or of mercury and sulfur, and they had many discussions about it. Everyone will say that their God is the true God, but tears will still fall for those who believe in other gods. Then we will argue about whether our hearts are good or bad. And there will be no conclusion. But if you truly study and distinguish between the true ideas and false ideas through experiments, once you determine the methods of those experiments, faith will become just like chemistry. Now, look at this book for a moment. This is a dictionary of geography and history. Look at this page. It contains information about geography and history from 2200 BC. Look closely. It's not about 2200 BC but rather what people thought about geography and history around 2200 BC. Thus, this single page corresponds to an entire book of geography and history. And what is written in this book is mostly true for around 2200 BC. If you look for evidence, you will find it abundantly. But consider for a moment if something seems off. Look, that's the next page. 1000 BC. A lot has changed in geography and history since then. At this time, things are as follows. Don't make a strange face. We perceive our bodies, thoughts, the Milky Way, trains, and history just as we feel them. Now, try to calm your mind a little with me. All right? The person raised a finger and quietly lowered it. Suddenly, Giovanni felt that his own self, his thoughts, the train, the scholar, the Milky Way, all sparkled together and then vanished into silence, reappeared brightly, and then vanished again. And when one of them flickered to life, the entire wide world opened up, and all of history was present. When it disappeared, everything turned empty and desolate, leaving only that. Gradually, it sped up, and soon it all returned to how it was. Now, listen. Therefore, your experiment must cover everything from the beginning to the end of these fragmented thoughts. That is the difficult part. However, of course, it can also be just for that moment. Oh, look, you can see the plesiosaur over there. You must untie the chain of that plesiosaur. At that moment, a pale signal rose from beyond the dark horizon, as if it were daytime, and the inside of the train became completely bright. The signal continued to shine high in the sky. Oh, it's the Magellanic Cloud. Now surely I will search for true happiness for myself, for my mother, for Campanella, for everyone. Giovanni bit his lip and stood gazing at that Magellanic Cloud, for the sake of the happiest person. Now, hold on tightly to your ticket. You must walk straight, not in the dream train, but in the true world, through the fires and fierce waves. You must never lose that one true ticket in the Milky Way. As he heard that cello-like voice, Giovanni saw that the Milky Way had already become distant, the wind blowing, and he stood straight on a grassy hill. He then heard the footsteps of that Dr. Borcanillo approaching quietly from afar. Thank you. I have conducted a very good experiment. I wanted to carry out an experiment to convey my thoughts to people from a peaceful place like this, as I was thinking earlier. Everything you said is noted in my notebook. Now, go home and rest. You should move forward as you decided in your dreams. And from now on, come to consult me anytime you like. I will surely move straight ahead. I will definitely seek true happiness, Giovanni said strongly. Well then, goodbye. Here is the ticket from earlier. The scholar placed a small folded green piece of paper into Giovanni's pocket. Then, the form of the weather-wheel pillar disappeared from view. Giovanni ran straight down the hill. He soon noticed that his pocket felt very heavy and was clinking. He stopped in the forest to investigate, and found that the strange heavenly ticket he had seen in his dream contained 2 large gold coins wrapped inside. "Thank you, Doctor." "Thank you, Mom. I'll go get the milk right away," Giovanni shouted as he began to run again. A mix of various emotions gathered in Giovanni's heart, feeling both indescribably sad and new. The star of the lute moved far to the west and stretched out as if in a dream. Giovanni opened his eyes. He had fallen asleep in the grass on the hill. His chest felt strangely hot, and cold tears flowed down his cheeks. Giovanni sprang up like a spring. The town was completely back to normal, and down below, many lights were twinkling, but the light felt somehow warmer than before. And the Milky Way, which he had just walked through in his dream, still hung hazily above, just as it had before. It appeared particularly misty above the dark southern horizon, and to its right, the red star of Scorpius sparkled beautifully. The overall position of the sky seemed not to have changed much. Giovanni ran down the hill with all his might. The thought of his mother, who was waiting for him without having had dinner, filled his heart. He dashed through the dark pine grove and then circled around the pale white fence of the pasture, returning to the dark cow shed from the entrance he had used earlier. There, it seems someone had just returned, as a cart was parked with 2 barrels on it that hadn't been there before. "Good evening," Giovanni shouted. "Yes." A man wearing white, thick trousers came out immediately. "What can I do for you?" "The milk didn't come to my place today." "Oh, I'm sorry," the man said, and he went inside, bringing out a bottle of milk to hand to Giovanni while continuing, "I'm really sorry. This afternoon, I accidentally left the fence open, so the cow immediately went to the mother cow and drank about half of it." The man chuckled. "I see. Well, I'll take it," Giovanni replied. "Yes, I'm really sorry about that." "Not at all." Giovanni held the warm milk bottle in both hands as he left the pasture. After passing through the tree-filled town and reaching the main street, he continued for a while until he came to an intersection. To his right, a large bridge spanning the river, which had taken Campanella and the others' lights away, loomed in the night sky. However, at the intersection of the town and in front of the stores, about 7 or 8 women had gathered, whispering something while looking towards the bridge. There were also many different lights shining on the bridge. For some reason, Giovanni felt a sudden chill in his chest. Without thinking, he shouted to the nearby people, "What happened?" "A child fell into the water," one person replied, and everyone turned to look at Giovanni. Giovanni, almost in a daze, ran towards the bridge. The bridge was crowded with people, and he couldn't see the river. A police officer in a white uniform was also there. Giovanni leapt from the edge of the bridge down to the wide riverbank. Many lights were bustling about along the water's edge. On the dark opposite bank, 7 or 8 fires were moving. In the middle of it all, the river, devoid of the lights from the kabocha, flowed quietly, making only a slight sound as it drifted grayish. At the very downstream point of the riverbank, there was a clear gathering of people standing in stark black. Giovanni ran toward it. Suddenly, he encountered Maruso, who had been with Campanella earlier. Maruso rushed over to Giovanni and said, "Giovanni, Campanella went into the river." "What? How? When?" Zainarai was trying to push the kabocha light towards the water from the boat. At that moment, the boat tipped, and he fell in. Then Campanella jumped in right away and pushed Zainarai back toward the boat. Zainarai managed to grab onto the side. But after that, Campanella disappeared. Everyone must be looking for him. Yeah, everyone came right away. Campanella's father came too. But they can't find him. Zainari was taken home. Giovanni went towards where everyone was gathered. There stood Campanera's father, dressed in black, surrounded by students and townsfolk, staring intently at his watch with a pale, pointed chin. Everyone was gazing silently at the river, not a single person spoke a word. Giovanni felt a trembling in his legs. The many acetylene lamps used for fishing were busily coming and going, and he could see the black river water flowing, shimmering with small waves. The river downstream reflected the vast galaxy, appearing as if it were the sky itself without water. Giovanni couldn't shake the feeling that Campanella was already beyond that galaxy. However, everyone else seemed to think that Campanella would soon emerge from somewhere between the waves, saying, "I swam quite a bit," or that he might be standing on some unknown sandbank, waiting for someone to come. But suddenly, Campanella's father declared firmly, "It's no use. It's been 45 minutes since he fell in." Giovanni felt an impulse to rush toward the doctor and say, "I know where Campanella went. I was walking with him," but his throat had tightened, and he couldn't say anything. The doctor looked at Giovanni for a while, as if thinking he had come to greet him. "You're Giovanni, right? Thank you for coming this evening," he said politely. Giovanni could only bow without saying anything. "Has your father returned yet?" the doctor asked, still holding his watch tightly. "No," Giovanni shook his head slightly. "I wonder what's going on. I received a very healthy letter from him the day before yesterday. It should have arrived around today. I guess the boat was delayed. Giovanni, please come to my house to play with everyone after school tomorrow." Saying this, the doctor turned his gaze towards the reflection of the river filled with the galaxy. Giovanni's heart was full of various feelings, and unable to say anything, he left the doctor's side, thinking he should hurry home with the milk and let his mother know about his father's return, and ran quickly towards the town.